Hey everybody. So, as mentioned in the previous videos, there's going to be some significant repetition in this course. And one example is right here. We're going to talk a little bit about synapses and just neurons interacting with different parts of the body. In this case, it's going to be a neuromuscular junction, so the neurons of the muscular system. It's going to be a little brief, it's going to be a little quick in this video. However, it's going to touch upon some really important parts for the neuromuscular junction. There may be some new terms, and as mentioned, we're going to continue to talk about these throughout the course. So it's not just a one and done here. So don't get nervous. We're going to continue talking about this. So let's just jump into a couple of vocab terms. One being the synapse, one being the synaptic knob, and then there's a couple more here. But the synapse is going to be the quote unquote contact point between the neuron and the targeted cell. Synapses are found all over the place. It's not just your muscles. However, if we are talking about our muscles, we're going to be talking about the neuromuscular junction, right? So the neuron in the muscle. And that's going to be specific for muscles. At the end of this neuromuscular junction, the endpoint, the neurons are going to expand into the synaptic knob, which I'll show you an image of in a second. The motor end plate is the part of the junction where the muscle is going to receive the neuronal message. And the synaptic cleft is the tiny gap between the neuron and the muscle. I'll show you that real quick here. So up in this upper part of the screen where I'm circling. So this is the smaller version of what's going on, right? So we have the synaptic knob, which is this larger section right here. The synaptic cleft is going to be this little gap in between the synaptic knob and the motor end plate, which is the pink part here. And you can see how they are not actually touching. However, this is one junction, neuromuscular junction. So what the heck is this? Look at this part of the screen. This is the neuron in yellow. We're going to talk about more of this later on. But this is the neuron in yellow. It's going to come down, and it's going to innervate within the muscles here, the muscle cell. So the signal comes down here, down the axon or down the neuron, and it's going to tell the muscle to contract. All right. So now we know what it looks like. Let's talk about how do they actually communicate with each other. So the first section here is just what does it look like? What are all the components? This slide here is going to discuss what's actually happening when they actually just talk with each other, how they communicate. So a nerve impulse is going to travel down the neuron and trigger the release of neurotransmitters. So first you need to have a signal. We'll talk more about that later. But once a signal is sent down the neuron, the signal is going to reach right here at the end here, and it's going to then release neurotransmitters from that synaptic knob into the junction, into the synapse. I know I'm going back and forth between slides, but I just want to make sure you can see all this. So once again, the neuron's going to send a signal. It's going to come down here and reach eventually the synaptic knob, this section up here. Again, this is a zoom in. All these little blue dots are neurotransmitters that are hanging out within the synaptic knob. They're hiding in here because if they're always being released, you're always going to have muscle contraction. We can't have that. So they're just hanging out in here waiting to be told, hey, go tell the muscle to contract. So once that signal reaches here, the little neurotransmitters are going to be released into the synaptic cleft, where they're going to bind to receptors on the opposite side. Once they bind to the receptors, they're going to send an additional signal to the muscles to allow contraction to occur. In the case of muscles, the neurotransmitter that is always being sent is known as ACH, acetylcholine. This is going to be the neurotransmitter for this chapter because it is what's being released in muscles. You may be more familiar with other neurotransmitters, maybe dopamine, right? Maybe epinephrine. These are different types of neurotransmitters. For muscles, we're specifically talking about acetylcholine because that is what's being released into the muscles to tell it to go. So that said, signal comes in, comes down the axon, it gets to the synaptic knob, The synaptic knob is then going to open up these vesicles. That's a term for this little bubble that you see right here, where all the neurotransmitters are hidden inside of. These vesicles that are holding onto the neurotransmitters are then going to release the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft, which are going to bind and then send an additional signal to allow for muscle contraction to occur. At the end of this process, when it's all said and done, there's going to be an enzyme. I know it's an enzyme because it says ACE, ASE at the end. Right? Remember, OSE is a sugar, ASE is an enzyme. At the very end of this process, this enzyme, acetylcholinesterase, is going to be released and break down those acetylcholines. So all these little blue guys over here that are just hanging out in the synaptic cleft, when it's all said and done, are going to be broken down by acetylcholinesterase because you have to get rid of them. Keep in mind, their job is to signal to the muscle to contract. You cannot have them in there permanently and forever, or else your muscles will be in a constant state of contraction. So at the end of the signal, when contraction is done, they're going to release from the receptors and then be broken down. Once again, this is just the beginning of this. We're going to talk about this in more detail. So if you have any questions on this section, please let me know.